Okay, calm down.
Israel is kind of presenting what they're doing as within the rules of law. They constantly say, they have their talking points. So Hamas uses human shields, which is funny because if they were using human shields, that would imply that it would stop them from doing what they're doing. In order to be an effective shield, Israel would have to not do what they're doing, but they're not. So they say that. Then they say, they had to kill this person, right? There was a Hamas person, so they have to kill countless civilians. Can you talk about all the ways they do violate human rights law? I know it's probably you'd be here like for, a 24-hour marathon. You don't have that time, but just some of them like proportionality, distinction, and also give people a sense of what a country could do, right? Let's say Israel wanted to go after Hamas, and I mean, this is not going to be solved militarily. But I'm just asking from like one discrete question of how does a country that wages war that does not violate international law, what would that look like?
So those are all excellent questions. The thing on human shields, this is a standard tagline that's used when there are mass civilian casualties. Israel has done this in all of its previous attacks in the past. The use of human shields doesn't mean that there are civilians around. It means that you intentionally take civilians and it's, by the way, we've seen the Israelis do in the occupied territories. And, you sort of parade them in front of you as a human shield. You put them on the Jeep, you put them in a particular location and so on. I mean, Hamas doesn't do that. Hamas is located in one of the most densely populated civilian territories in the world, not because they decided to locate themselves in the midst of civilians. They're Gazans. Many of them have never been outside the cage in their entire life. They were born into it. So, and that's not human shields being in those areas. And by the way, Israel has military command centers and in densely populated civilian areas. So that doesn't mean human shields. Secondly, even if you say that there is a combatant in the midst of those civilians and you're going after the combatant, that is not a justification under international humanitarian law. As you mentioned, there are principles that have to be respected. Proportionality is one of them. Principle of distinction between combatants and non-combatants and their facilities is another one. The principle of precaution is another one. The law requires that you look for lawful means that will spare civilians. You don't, otherwise, you can just do what this insane minister in Israel asked for yesterday or the day before and just drop a nuclear weapon on Gaza. Right? Because, there's combatants everywhere, so we'll just nuke the whole place. I mean, this is not a lawful justification. This is a genocidal approach. So international law does not provide that out for them. To answer your bigger question, what would you do to end attacks by Hamas? You could end the occupation, because it is an armed resistance group which is fighting against the occupation. Now, if you think that somebody in Hamas, and clearly in this case they have committed war crimes, you can hold them accountable under the rule of law. So, I remember very well after September 11th, our office issued an appeal to the United States to treat this as a crime against humanity and to go after the perpetrators under the rule of law, to bring them to accountability, bring them to trial, and show the moral high ground to those who would use violence versus those who would use the rule of law and international standards. Of course, the US chose another course. They went on a global temper tantrum that ended up in the deaths of millions of civilians around the world. So that is, that is a lesson that is to be learned. If Israel wanted to see accountability for Hamas perpetrators or those who commanded them who actually committed war crimes on October the 7th, they would have a lot of international solidarity for doing so. There could be a process, there could be indictments, there could be investigations, but it is very clear to me this is not about Hamas. It's about using the pretext of the horrific, attacks on the 7th as a pretext for the ethnic cleansing and total destruction of Gaza, because tactically you can't imagine that that's what they're really trying to do. When you say there's one Hamas commander and you're in a densely populated refugee camp like Jabalia, and you drop massive ordnance on top of it, creating a huge crater and killing so many people, nobody believes that that was an attempt just to kill a particular commander. If you know, the metaphors are out there everywhere. You know, you have some terrorist goes into a school,
right,
and has a bunch of school children, you know, and so the police say, okay, we'll drop a bomb and kill everybody in the building. We got the terrorists. You also killed all the kids, you know. So clearly that is not the case. Neither, it's clear, is the main intention to free the hostages, the prisoners that have been taken by Hamas, because this is not what you would do if you were worried about the safety of the hostages. Who knows how many of them have been killed already under Israeli bombs,
right?
And how many more will be killed as well. So it's clear that that's really not what that is. What that is about.
Yeah, that's kind of stunning, by the way, that point that you just brought up, because it's clear Israel does not care about Palestinian life, but they also don't care about Israeli life. They care about vengeance. And, you know, the New York Times, I think, talked about the aura of potency or something that they're seeking to reestablish, that they would just be bombing potentially. And we'll see when some of the fog of war clears. But who knows, as you said, how many of their own Israeli hostages they've killed themselves through bombing. Unquestionably.
I mean, they're with the Gazans, you know, they're in the same places. And by the way, they're in the hospitals getting treatment when hospitals are being bombed. They're, you know, all of this. So this is not about the hostages. And I don't even think it's vengeance. I think that it is a much more calculated, it's not a temper tantrum. It is a pretext for the clearing of Gaza.
Right.
In the public, they've been trying to stir up as much hunger for vengeance as possible, so that the government can have the space that it needs to carry out these kinds of atrocities. But I think it is a very considered and intentional series of actions that are going to continue as well. So, but what I have said before is, any Hamas fighters or, you know, armed groups living under occupation have a right to resist as a matter of international law against military targets. They don't have a right to attack civilians, right? So any Hamas fighters who committed war crimes against civilians, or the commanders who ordered them, should be held accountable under the rule of law. When I'm interviewed in Western media, everybody wants to hear that, but they don't want to talk about holding Israel accountable for its atrocities before October the 7th, including, you know, a peak of them throughout this year that led to these kinds of reactions. They don't want to talk about the atrocities that have been happening for 75 years and a lack of accountability there. And they don't want to talk about accountability for Israeli war crimes since October the 7th, as if this is, you know, you solve this problem by seeking accountability for Hamas crimes, and then you ignore year after year, decade after decade, and again now, massive atrocities being perpetrated by the Israelis. If you believe in the rule of law, the answer is, you know, fight whatever war you want to fight, but there are rules. You know, international humanitarian law, international human rights law, international criminal law imposes rules, and those have to be respected by everybody, and they are not being respected by Israel. So I'm all for accountability, but it's got to be accountability for all perpetrators and redress for all victims.